Okay, today we're going to be talking about clean manufacturing. Now, clean manufacturing is kind of a catch-all term for any type of manufacturing method that doesn't just pump chemicals into the air or into the water or into the soil. It's used in lots of documentation that you'll see promoting kind of these advanced clean technologies and the manufacturing processes for a lot of technologies. More often than not is actually very polluting, even if the materials that they're making are viewed as green, like, for example, paper bags. Paper bags a lot of times are viewed as much greener than plastic bags, but a lot of times the manufacturing process for those bags uses all sorts of nasty chemicals like chlorine and whatnot to bleach those bags, so the actual process is not very green. Even though the product might be viewed as green. So we're going to focus on the actual manufacturing process and how to make those cleaner. First thing, IB expects you to explain why the introduction of mass production increased damage to the natural environment. Now, you need to look at history. Back in the 18th and 19th centuries and in the 20th century, the industry was taking off. You had the Industrial Revolution kind of in full swing in the 1900s, and people weren't really considering where all of the soot that was coming out of these factories was going. They weren't considering what the long-term effects of dumping sewage and waste into water systems, where it could percolate down into aquifers and taint wells and rivers and lakes and all that sort of thing. And governments really encourage the growth of industry, because when industry grows, then the economy grows. When the economy grows, governments have more funds to be able to work. So that was kind of the priority back in the days, and they didn't really consider what the damage would be done. This picture right here is actually from Cleveland. In 1969, famously, the Cuyahoga River caught fire. You can see Cleveland rocks in more ways than one. We started the EPA because of this incident. The funny thing is, rivers prior to this incident had been burning all over the place, in Pittsburgh and Chicago, Detroit, New York. Rivers caught fire all the time. It was just because this particular event caught national media attention for one reason or another. It wasn't uncommon for this to happen. It's just because of this, and because the fire actually damaged a bridge over the Cuyahoga, that it got a lot of attention. So a lot of the time, restoration occurs not because you get, as this guy says, a bunch of wild-haired hippies protest down the street. It happens because normal citizens, everyday people who are up and down the watershed, in this case of the Lake Erie's, and the Great Lakes rather, worked very hard for 40 years to improve the river. Now, if you get a chance, open up this is a video here taken by a guy who was interviewing someone who worked on a fireboat in the Cuyahoga River back in the 60s and 70s, explaining what they would do to kind of clean up and dredge some of these materials out of the river to clean up the river. And this was a long-term project. Repairing an ecosystem is something that is, 30, 40, 50, 100 years long project, that it takes quite a while. For a long time, the Cuyahoga River and Lake Erie were in a real bad shape. It took a very concerted effort to be able to bring it to a spot where you can still have things like Edgewater Park and people able to go in the water and not coming out of the water covered in sewage. There are reasons that companies want to clean up their manufacture. They want to promote these positive impacts. They want to ensure a neutral impact on the environment, and they want to minimize negative impacts by conserving resources, also reducing pollution and the use of energy, and reduce waste of energy and resources. And you want to breathe. If you're pumping all sorts of sulfuric chemicals into the atmosphere, then you get smog. You get acid rain. Also, there's CO2 and other greenhouse gases, which don't help things at all either. Outline an initial response to reducing emission of pollutants is adding cleanup technologies to the end of the manufacturing process. This is called the end-of-pipe approach. What the end-of-pipe approach is when manufacturers don't change the way a product is manufactured, but rather they put some sort of system in line with the exhaust systems or the outflow systems. If it's with water, they put something in place that cleans up the air or the water as it leaves their facility. The picture on the left at the bottom here is a manufacturing facility, photograph of a manufacturing facility. I believe this is in San Diego in the 1970s. After the Clean Air Act went into effect, the photo on the right is a picture of one of those smokestacks after it's been retrofitted with a air scrubber. And the factory, it doesn't look like it's doing anything, but it is actually running. That scrubber filtration unit is actually removing a lot of the particulate matter and the sulfur from the smokestacks. So you have desulfurization systems that are used to prevent air pollution, and then with water, you have these water treatment systems and filtration systems that prevent contamination of waterways, lakes, and underground aquifers. Now, legislation is an important impetus for manufacturers to clean up the manufacturing process, because typically a corporation isn't going to want to volunteer to clean up their manufacturing process unless they believe it to be in their best interest, and usually that best interest is because of the public image of the company. If a company gets a image of being a major polluter, they might want to clean things up just so they can say to people, "Hey, look, we're not doing as much damage as you think we're doing." Famously, BP, after the Deepwater Horizon explosion in 2011, is cleaning up because of the image that their company got after the explosion of this oil well out in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico, and dumping millions of gallons of crude into the Gulf. So they suffered a huge PR nightmare there. So they started cleaning up, and they started taking these steps to clean up their manufacturing and their extraction of minerals and oil, and then did a PR campaign to highlight all of the work that they've been doing. If a company doesn't have that incentive to clean up, then a lot of time regulation by the government is used to incentivize those companies to clean up their operations. You have a carrot and a stick approach here, and the carrot is the reward. Rewards are typically non-controversial. That everyone likes, getting, benefits from the government for doing things right. But what gets controversial is you get the stick, which is these penalties that are put into place when companies do not meet those requirements. And then you have a combination of both. And it can be controversial if you look at a concept called cap and trade, which is widely accepted as a good way to reduce carbon emissions, where companies are given a certain allotment of carbon that they're allowed to pump out into the atmosphere. If they pump out less, then they can actually sell those carbon credits to other companies that need more credits to pump out more. If they actually create technologies that absorb carbon, like there are algae farms that are farming algae and generating natural oils, those actually absorb carbon from the atmosphere, so they can actually sell and generate more carbon credits. Like I said before, 1969, the fire on the Cuyahoga actually is what kicked off the Environmental Protection Agency here in the United States. State that legislation can be policed by monitoring through collection of quantitative data. The EPA in the United States does the data collection, and they provide reports on individual locations in corporations. They have what people call the big hammer, which is to declare a location a super site. And a super site sounds like it's pretty cool, but it's actually pretty horrific. A super site is a location that is eligible for funding through the EPA Superfund, but it really regulates what the site can be used for. This is places where there were manufacturing facilities that dump toxins into the ground. You have toxic cadmium and antimony gets pumped into the ground and contaminates the aquifers and the local rivers. You have arsenic that's left from different metal production facilities. There are landfills that have chemicals that are leaching out into the environment. There's several of these locations around that have been listed as Superfunds, and that link right there is actually to the EPA's website. If you take a look at it, right here, this is where there's a bunch of a listing of all the Superfund sites in Ohio, and there are some locally in Akron, in Amherst, and Marion. There are some. So you take a look at this. It'll kind of open your eyes to exactly what is a Superfund site. Now, most cleanup operations are reactive. That means this cleanup happens after the damage is done. But in order to properly implement green manufacturing, you need to rethink the whole process. Companies typically are reacting to legislation or impending legislation by doing minimum required steps to clean up their production. To get more radical approaches, they'll need to do a full life cycle analysis, and those are far more proactive, planning ahead rather than responding to PR disasters or government regulation. To go back to topic 3 and take a look at the green design section to learn about the life cycle analysis. And targets for reducing pollution and waste from industry are agreed on internationally, but not all industrial nations agree to those targets. Now, some targets are hard to set for all countries. For example, developing nations say that they shouldn't have to adhere to the same requirements that are already in place for industrialized nations. It becomes kind of an economic argument when you get to that point, and that's kind of the big thing of, like I had mentioned before, the Kyoto Protocol. Remember this map? If you look at this map, this is the acceptance of the Kyoto Protocol. All the green countries accepted the Kyoto Protocol. As you can see, the red country, the U.S., we did not accept the protocol because at the time our government objected to the fact that industrialized countries were under more scrutiny than developing countries. And some countries they felt were taking advantage of that. The big one was China. They thought that China, which was listed as a developing country, was far more developed than they were letting on to, and that they should be held to the same standard as everyone else. So it was argumentative, but honestly, right now the Kyoto Protocol is irrelevant because it expired about 10 years ago. So now there's other things that are going into effect. But the governments typically don't agree on how to implement changes, but a lot of governments and organizations, NGOs, believe that things need to change. In fact, if you look at the statement that the Vatican released fairly recently about saying that climate change and energy and equity are matters that all countries need to take up because it affects the poor far more than it affects the wealthy. So take a look at some of this stuff when you get a chance, and it'll give you a lot more insight into how these countries are either accepting or not accepting these standards.